Patrick, we need to talk.
Phoummala, this is your 4th year doing sessions for our community. I will talk to you about anything.
Right, but what do you think we're going to talk about today?
We're going to talk about governance and security for the cloud.
Come on, it's not that hard.
No, it's hard and complicated and all the euphemisms for let's don't and say we didn't.
Well, think about what have you deployed in the last 5 years on premises that wasn't a Raspberry Pi or a printer?
Nothing. No, I mean, it's all pretty much serverless and cloud services.
Well, that's just it. The cloud is easy, right?
Yeah, it's the ultimate home lab. I can turn it up and turn it down and side projects and things that I'm incubating here, yeah.
How many ports have you left open?
A couple. SSH is usually an offender.
How many service accounts have all access to everything?
Oh, you mean like using the root logon for pretty much anything that you would normally do in terms of admin and then overloading 1 or 2 service accounts with permissions they don't need for interoperability? Never, I've never done that.
Yeah. How many times have you told yourself, I'm gonna go back and clean that up?
You always do, but that becomes one more area of technical debt. And I wonder if that's one of the things that makes people, gives a pause and sort of slows down their deployment to cloud, right? It's not so much that they don't know that governance needs to extend, but it's like they don't really know where to start and the nomenclature is different. So it's not so much a lack of knowledge, it's more just sort of being able to interpret what their needs are in a different platform.
So the cloud, it's easy. As you said, you're spinning stuff up, right? When things are easy, there's lapses in security and governance because you just want to get your job done. Right. You just want to rock and roll and go. Well, when you do that, there's usually a downside, right? You've left all your ports open, your service principal has access to just about everything. Yeah, security breaches, things like that. Unauthorized data access. I mean, this happens every day.
And you're spending all your time talking about this now, right?
Why do you think I don't have a voice anymore? I'm telling everybody about governance.
All right, so why don't we do this? Let's go through kind of the problem first. Like, how does it present itself in teams? We can talk about sort of what drives bottlenecks, what causes them to maybe even some cases pull back to on-prem because that's a security model that they understand, how to interpret the needs of the CSIO's organization. Let's walk through that to get started, and then let's dive in and show some recommended best practices that can make that a little bit easier. And I think they'll get a lot out of that.
First off, let's talk about guardrails.
Guardrails.
Okay. So governance typically is thought of as a negative connotation, right?
Yeah, it's a huge burden and an overlay, and it's occasionally done, and we just don't like talking about it.
Guardrails. Guardrails isn't negative. Guardrails allow you to do your job or your function without having that feeling that someone is bearing down on you. Think of it as a playground, right? And inside the playground, there's playground equipment, and everybody's playing, and we know the rules. And the rules are you can't push each other. You can try, but someone's going to get hurt. One person at a time going down the slide. I mean, things like that. Those were the rules. And then the perimeter fence where the playground is kept inside are guardrails. So when you try to climb over that, you usually get put back down. But inside the playground, you could still play and have fun. Be a kid, Guardrails. And now we transform into IT.
Well, and if you're the security team, I like the analogy of the playground fence because really it allows the parents to sit more comfortably in the shade and let the little people run far, far away because they're going to stay inside of bounds. So it definitely reduces a lot of anxiety for them.
And the people inside inside the fence know that, hey, I can do my job, and I have I don't want to say no fear. But I know that if I do try to do something that I'm not allowed to do or out of compliance, that I'll usually get shot down or there'll be some sort of alert or a warning. But for the most part, you can do your job and you're able to do it fast.
So how do you get to that conversation with the team about guardrails when there's that moment of we need to do training, or I'm looking at a bunch of terms in the console that I've never seen before, or how am I integrating my, let's say, Azure AD with my on-prem, or can I carry roles forward outside of my on-prem environment? And everyone looks around and there is not necessarily in those first set of deployments someone who is applying guardrails or can start that conversation. How do you get them from that, this is really kind of scary and strange, with legitimate concern about damaging the business by exposing something to the outside? How do you kind of get them to start thinking in those terms?
First off, we have to realize that the cloud is different terminologies, but for the most part, they mean the same thing as on-premises. And I know we had this conversation prior to us standing here talking, where service principal on-premises, we'd call them service accounts, right? Or just an account. Now in Azure, they're called service principals. They're accounts that run functions for certain applications. They run the automations and whatnot. So we're just taking that concept that we've had on premises and giving it new names in the cloud. For the most part, it's the same thing. But now we're taking it and we're building this all in so that when we hand off these environments to our developers and our operations team, they don't got to think about it. It's already there. It's fast and it's easy for them.
But there is something fundamentally different too. I think that the whole point of adopting cloud is that you want to make it more available. You want for access, right? You want a lot of teams to be able to access. You may, especially in the early days, you may be working with a contractor or maybe an MSP or someone else who's doing deployment on your behalf. So you're sort of at once struggling with, I have a new way of applying security or new area that I need to extend security into at the same time that the business expects you to rapidly allow a lot more people access.
So using the guardrails, you've taken that roadblocker away. Let's think about when virtualization came into play. And you had the VMware admin, right? And if you want a new VM, you'd go to the VMware admin and request the VM. And the admin, who I used to be one, would say, yeah, it's going to take you 3 or 4 weeks. In reality, it doesn't take that long to spin up a VM. But we were just throwing it out there. But we were the roadblockers. We said, hey, wait, stop. We determined that time frame. We got to take that roadblocker out of the way and say, okay, you want a new subscription? You want to write a new application? Here you go. It's easy, just like that. Now, we've used the tools. We've used the governance. We put built-in governance inside these subscriptions so that when we hand it off to developers and operations, it's already there. So doesn't that make you feel a little bit more comfortable? Not as fearful.
Right. Well, I think that maybe is the place to start. Why don't we pull up the access control panel. Let's look at what roles and accounts and integration looks like, and then where that appears in the Azure portal and where those guardrails are.
Okay, let's take a look at the Azure portal. So governance within Azure, there's many components to that. There's role-based access control, which is also called RBAC, which is a lot quicker to say. There's resource graph. There is cost management, because maintaining costs is critical to governance. And then there's blueprints and policies.
And so the goal here also, a lot of times you'll hear and see documentation talking about IAM. So it really is also taking that larger perspective on access, not just user, password, token, or role. It's actually part of a broader policy from the get-go to make it easier.
Yeah, so access control, role-based access control, RBAC, is basically, it's a segregation of duties, right? It's making sure that the person that's assigned to this specific role is doing a specific function, because not everybody needs to have access to everything.
No?
I know. Don't we all wish we did?
But isn't that one of the first concepts really, as you go from this idea of sort of almost domain admin, max access out of the gate, to instead making it based on request and need and demonstrated need,
Yes.
sort of flipping it around, and instead of saying, well, we'll narrow down access for people or services that maybe we're concerned about, and instead everything must justify its access.
Pretty much. What's your role? And you can have multiple roles. So with RBAC, typically you will assign roles to security groups within Active Directory. Yes, you can create user accounts within the Azure portal, but now that's just another area that you have to maintain. Ideally, if you have Azure Active Directory or AD, you would just use one of the security groups or a user account within that source. You basically want your source to be Active Directory. That way, from an onboarding perspective, it's one central location to pull all the identity from.
And we actually see that a lot with our customers that are using our Access Rights Manager product, where they have, let's say, Office 365, right? So they've got Azure AD behind the scenes, services that are a part of their Azure subscription, because for enterprise, a lot of times it contains other services, but they still have their on-prem AD for authentication and all of the services that rely on that. But then they have file share permissions, they've got group policy permissions and everything else. Let me show you that right quick. The view that they use over and over and over again is this one, where you're trying to solve that problem of where is that super user permission coming from? Where is that sysadmin permission coming from? And where you have a lot of nested groups, a lot of nested roles that are both on-prem and out in cloud. And so they'll a lot of times just pull up this view that pulls them all together, and then they can see the little green arrow that says, hey, there's inheritance here for SA permission that's coming from an unexpected place.
So with RBAC within Azure, we have 70 built-in roles, but you can create custom roles, because we all know every environment is slightly unique.
But this is the thing where I think I'm finally beginning to hear you when you're talking about blueprints. The idea of starting from the beginning with defining guardrails so that they're just universally applied and people don't have to really think about the way that they're going to use it.
So blueprints is governance at scale, right? Okay. So first you're going to start with RBAC. We talked about that, but then there's policy. Policy is what restricts you from doing something, an action. Policy prevents you.
Or enables.
Yeah, or enables. But policy alerts you as well. It also lets you know that if you have an owner to a subscription that does not multi-factor authentication, enabled, boom, that's a risk. It lets you know what your risks are.
So, and let me stop you for a second, because I think you hit on something that's really interesting there, which is the idea of context as a part of authentication. Like, how many times do we need to reset our password where if we're sitting at our desk, it just magically always works? And then you're on an airplane, on your phone, and you need to actually up-level your credentials to complete something, and that's the time that the contextual awareness for security is going to say, no, you're going to need a token, and you're going to need 2FA, and you're going to need all these other things, and you're going through hoops. Like that being a part of this, where it is about the application, or it is about the user context, or it is about where it comes from, is that defining that policy up front allows you to actually include context as a part of that.
It's built in, you enable the policy. So we've taken these two components. If you're doing it manually, it will slow you down.
Yeah,
it will. I'm going to be honest here. I said before it's going to speed you, but if you are applying governance individually to a lot of subscriptions, it will slow you down. And that's where Blueprints comes into play. Blueprints is the automation. The correct term is it's an automated way of governance. It's taking all that governance you applied, all those policies that you thought about, that you created, whether using our custom policies or using a built-in policy, and then potentially you have custom RBAC rules, or using the built-in ones. You've taken that, because that takes time to think about. That's a process, right? So you've taken all that, and now you're like, I want to be able to go at scale. So Blueprints wraps that all up in a nice package with a bow, and when you create a blueprint, you just stamp it to a subscription, and then it gets deployed, and all your governance is there. Your roles, your permissions, and even your ARM templates, Azure Resource Management templates. It's infrastructure as code.
Sure, but that is a great point, and it's one thing where I think when you think about governance from a cloud perspective, you actually have an advantage, is that on-prem you have CapEx buys gear that sits in a rack. Here with cloud, you can have people spinning up potentially very expensive resources. Yes. And so you can actually apply, as a part of your security governance, actual financial governance and cost management governance as a part of those same templates, because you are controlling not just access, but who can actually bring up resources that are going to have an effect on the OpEx bill.
GDPR, if you are a global organization, most likely you're going to be affected by GDPR. You can create policies that restrict where resources are being deployed. You can say, hey, this application is for our European users. Only deploy in European data centers. Boom. And then you can throw that in a blueprint. And every time you have an application that's similar, or a subscription that you want to have similar to this blueprint, you just stamp it to that. And you can create multiple blueprints. And there's version control in that as well, too.
Does that help facilitate that conversation between the COO and the CSIO to be able to say, like, if you could talk about cost management, especially for OpEx, get them having a conversation about it, then all of a sudden the ops team is thinking about governance, where normally they're just sort of like, hey, security team, do what you need to do to keep us safe. But once they're communicating better, then the business requirements for the deployment in the first place are part of that conversation from the beginning.
Totally. So, like you said, Cost management is usually kind of like left in the back. Nobody wants to talk about cost either. But that's part of governance. So with policies, you can control cost expenditures. We have a cost management tool within the Azure governance set of tools that actually allows you to see what your resources are doing, the utilization of it. And then you can say, I want to create alerts if I've got resources that are just peaking too high. Potentially, maybe you deployed code that was bad.
Oh, that would never happen.
Or let's say you have underutilized resources, right? And you could see, maybe I can shut those down. That can save us some money. And then with the cost management tool, it can see in the AWS. It can see in the Azure.
Right. And I mean, so many of our customers use the Azure Cost Calculator tool. That's one of the free tools that we built. And that ends up being a big part of that, is that there's almost an opportunity to have the ops team and the finance team actually create space to focus on security inside of operations. Because to them, if they can include their cost controls along with the broader policies, then it's easy for them to say, hey, you know what, we really get this governance thing, and it is important to us, and we actually want to have policy, so we're going to make sure that we create 15% free time, or some chunk of free time, or maybe hire dedicated resources, or at least do development to make that something that they have a vested interest in applying, as opposed to just assuming that somehow it's going to get overlaid.
Well, we're making it so that the right people can do their jobs. We're taking that thought of like, wow, we got to do all this policy, and we got to all do this work. Someone's got to maintain cost and budget. No, we have these tools here that basically do it for you, that enable developers and operations to do their job.
One area, though, that we do see a little bit of a difference is there are a lot of times for our customers one-off requests that come in. So to your point of eliminating that bottleneck, they'll typically use self-service tools for that. So like an access rights manager, there's actually a web interface they can go to, they log in, they can browse policies and resources that they want to get to, explain why they need it, and then route that for approval to automate that piece.
You're still alive.
I am still alive. That didn't hurt a bit.
Not at all.
Okay, so my takeaways here from this conversation are, one, it's okay to be nervous. You are a little bit between a rock and a hard place. The business wants you to deploy quickly, but there is some learning that needs to happen, and you are responsible for making sure that you protect the business. Two, the good news is that it's really not all that different. The nomenclature maybe is different. There's a couple of opportunities to think about containing policies in a broader sense. But once you really learn that nomenclature, then you can map what you already know on-prem to what you're doing in the cloud. And the third is there's just a lot of opportunities to learn about this.
And I've got two places where you can go and learn. We have docs.microsoft.com, which is technical documentation, great resources there. And then we also have MS Learn, which is our free learning portal. Another great resources. It's all free. It's a sandbox environment. You go through different learning modules, and when you're done, it gets wiped out, and you can start over again or go on to a different module if you like.
Yeah, those are really, really helpful. Well, thank you so much for the conversation. It's been great talking to you, and I hope your voice comes back.
Well, I have more governance to talk about around the world, so we'll see.